Hello and welcome to Live from America podcast. My life is complete. Noam Dworman is back after a long time. No see, and he'd been in vacations and touring around and doing a lot of things and avoiding me. Welcome back, Noam Dworman.
Thank you. Welcome. Happy to be here, Hatem.
And once in a while, we always have great guests, but once in a while, you have this perfect guest. And that perfect guest is the person that makes you just feel better. And you know the episode is going to be great. And he's funny and he's well known and he knows, they have the right information. The only thing, he's not Muslim. Hopefully, one day he'll convert. But other than that, he's pretty much perfect. It's MSNBC legal analyst, the one and only, my very good friend, Danny Cevallos is here. Thank you, Danny, for being here.
Wow, I have to hire you for my funeral because that is just the nicest introduction I've ever had. That I need that. That is great. Or I just need to call you for daily affirmation. I feel amazing.
Danny, he spoke at my father's funeral.
Is that right?
Yeah, but he didn't do well.
I was on.
I'm kidding. He was great.
Literally, everybody came to me after and I said, that I was amazing. And this is, by the way, was one of the biggest honors is I loved Manny so much, and to be recognized among the thousands of people that love him and wanted a chance to speak. That was
right.
I think that's when I started liking Noam a little bit when he picked me.
Well, let me ask you this. I have to really ask though. I mean, Hatem, that had to be a stressful gig. I mean, you had an entire audience, I imagine, full of people in the industry, comedians, comedy writers. That is a tough crowd to get up and speak in front of, isn't it?
And I had the best joke ever, but it helped that it really came out of.
What was the joke? What was the joke?
I said that, I was talking about Manny as a boss, and I said like he will, when 9/11 happened, he brought all the people in the Middle East, from the Middle East, that works in the olive tree, which is a lot, and told us no one is allowed to harass you or make fun of you. No one except me. Which is
that's a good one.
Which is true, but yeah, it was tough. But I think like sometimes when you love somebody more than a lot of things, it just it takes you. And watching Noam had a great speech. A couple of people had also good. I was the best one though.
Well, it was actually a very tight knit family. There weren't a lot of strangers there. We all knew each other. It wasn't like they're a bunch of CAA executives or something. So I think it was a very warm family.
It was sold out though.
It was sold. Yeah, everything we do
sold out.
I remember one of the things that I said is because one of the things that I said.
Did they add a second show, Noam?
Yeah, we wanted to.
No, one of the things that
how about that? I know the lingo.
Yeah.
That's all you people think about money.
It's like to drink. No, because back in the day, the cellar wasn't as successful as it is now, but it was getting there. It wasn't. So I would go to Manny. It's like, hey Manny, we're almost sold out. And he was like, okay, whatever. And then go back outside. I go back outside. I come back. It's sold out, and come back. And then I come back and there's like, Manny, it's sold out. There's no room. There's people standing. And then he would give me the smile. And in the funeral, it was no room and there was people standing outside. So I said, I know that Manny's smiling right now because this is what he likes when it's like all sold out and there's people standing outside.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it was amazing,
to say one of the things that just came to my mind, it's true. You can't imagine the Comedy Cellar. The Comedy Cellar was successful then, but it wasn't as it is now. There were plenty of times it would be empty, plenty of times but when we'd have a good night, my father would look at me, he'd go, what should I buy? all excited. You buy new computers, it was very much hand to mouth then, where
sure
a good night meant you could go buy a computer. It was that direct. It wasn't like a zoomed out thing where you have a certain amount of money and you can plan. It was like, well, if next weekend is good, maybe I can buy the new cell phone, whatever it is. It was very hand to mouth.
And this is all pre-Village Underground. This is all before that, right? Wow.
Yeah. Well, Village Underground was open, but it only was a music club at the time. Yeah.
Got it.
It was always the place to be. Like you always have the big stars coming up. You only get respect if you perform it at the Comedy Cellar. Like there's certain things that have always been, and that's one of the things that I like about the way things were run in that business. It was always respect to comedy, to the art, to the comedians. Anybody but the Middle East people. Yeah. But yeah,
let me just say this. I've said it before on this show, but I mean, one of my favorite things to do in New York, even before I met you two, was to go to Olive Tree because I'm such a comedy fan. That back table is legendary. It's like going to a museum, but the actual players are there. And I've never been disappointed. I always see someone that I'm a fan of there. And then I started thinking, I've probably mentioned this every other time I'm on your show. Noam, should I not be saying that? Is that okay that I might be driving visitors to go check out the back table, or is that like a New York secret?
No, it's okay. It's okay. When there's somebody famous here, they can get. We do a very good job of policing it.
Oh, good.
But you know, most people just kind of look, and they're not overbearing, and they don't really bother the comedians. It's a good culture there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's for a comedy fan like me. It's like going to church. It's so cool.
During the vice presidential debate, both Trevor Noah and Aziz were both there in Tree, and I was actually monitoring exactly what you're saying, because they weren't even sitting at the back table; they were actually sitting around the restaurant. Right. And nobody bothered them. Everybody knew they're there. It's clear they're there, but people act cool. That's
what New York's about. Yeah, New York has that effect. That's the great thing about living here.
Yeah, I usually don't get bothered when I'm there. Like, I'm not sure why it's that funny. I'm Captain America, literally.
That's right. You are literally Captain America.
Wow, that's a good joke. Okay.
Another, speaking of Aziz, Manny, Aziz used to, like, when it was new comic and he'd do the open mic for Manny would tell me, give him a few minutes. And it's like, what? Like, I don't see it. And it just like one of the things that, Manny was brilliant about. But Danny, you're here. What's going on in the world? I definitely want to talk about PDiddy later, but what's going on? I know you're on call for breaking news anytime. So what's the breaking news?
There's so much going on. I mean, just yesterday, this is sort of the moments in this business that, I love, but they're also terrifying. And the scariest thing is when a filing drops. We now have e-filing in all the courts. So when a giant filing gets dropped, whether it's the Supreme Court or district court, it's immediate. You have a PDF document that's out there for the world to see. And sure enough, yesterday, there was a motion by the government in the Trump January 6th case, which is venued in the District of Columbia, which laid out, I mean, the purpose of it is for the government to argue, the prosecutors to argue that Donald Trump was acting as a private person and not as the president. And the reason they're arguing that is so that he doesn't have what the Supreme Court gave as immunity earlier this year. And so to do that, they have to convince a court that everything he did was as a candidate purely and not as a president. And they have the law against them in the sense that there's a presumption that certain things will be arguably presidential. So the government has to overcome things like talking to Mike Pence as vice president. And there's a presumption that it would be official conduct and therefore immune. But really, the secondary reason this was such a significant filing is that it's 165 pages laying out the government's entire case against Donald Trump. And as a defense attorney, you simply never get that kind of preview of the government's case as a defense attorney. Forget the public, because the government, and when I say the government, I usually mean federal prosecutors. Federal prosecutors are tight-lipped. They don't offer an outlook or an outline of their proposed prosecution. So this is a very rare instance. And it's kind of I'm not very good with analogies, but it's almost like a Schrodinger's cat. It's a prosecution that may never happen, or maybe it's already dead and we don't know it, because this is one of the federal prosecutions that if Donald Trump is elected, he'll make it go away as soon as he's inaugurated. So it may be much ado about nothing. But yesterday, as it dropped, I was called on air maybe 10 minutes later. And of course, I was on page 4 of 165. So when I'm asked, what do you think? I have to be honest and say I'm still looking at it. But now we've had about a day to digest it. And still 165 pages, 18 hours later, I can't say I've committed it to memory. But that's been sort of the lead news. But there's other stuff going on as well. There's the Tyree Nichols beating death. Police officers were charged by federal authorities in connection with the beating death of a suspect, Tyree Nichols, caught on camera. And you have a couple officers who pleaded guilty and cooperated. So that's really, I'm sitting on verdict watch for that. It could happen at any time.
Let me just say for our listeners who I'm sure they know this, that Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment devised by an Austrian physicist, which he designed to illustrate a paradox of quantum superposition.
Yes.
So that probably clears that up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I've explained it all. All I know about that is that it's one of those, I never understand it. I've tried to understand it, but all I know is the cat may be already dead in the box and we don't know it. So that's all I know.
I don't. It's one of those I never heard. Maybe I've heard that phrase before, but I don't know it. So don't feel bad, Hatem.
Oh, wow. Why? I understand. So
go ahead.
What's your thoughts on the Trump thing? I think for me, I think every time Trump is about to lose the election, they give him a lifeline, they give him a gift, they give him a reason to people but be like, oh, they're against him and all that. That's what I think.
Yeah. I occupy myself these days with the following question. I'm convinced, regardless of the law, that Trump has done things which in a normal situation should disqualify him from being anywhere near the White House again. Sitting by on January 6th, they're urging him, they're going to kill Mike Pence. So this is it. I don't need to know that that's criminal. And as a matter of fact, certain things could be criminal and not even bother me. I'm choosing a president here. It's not. I don't need that technicality of the law. So I'm sold that Trump has done despicable things, and I'm also sold that he's an erratic personality, which is also a serious issue. And yet, this is what I'm struggling with. I look at the world on fire. I look at what's going on in Iran and Israel and all these huge monumental questions of future history. I don't want to say it's 1939 again, but it could be. It's not like there's no scenarios where this spins out into something,
Right.
And I ask myself, do I trust the Antony Blinken worldview that says the Taliban is going to do a better job at representing women, that kind of thing, or the more generic kind of hardline conservative Republican worldview? And I feel like I do trust the conservative, more Republican worldview. I do, not because I'm pro-life. It's not, people want to connect or I deny climate change, but because I think that Churchill would agree with me. I mean, I think that weakness has been provocative on the world stage for a long time, going back to Obama, and you can retrace the things and what's going on in Iran now. And anyway, so do you have to hold your nose? And would someone, hold their nose and vote for this monstrosity of a character? Because in the end, the policies are what matter. 10 years from now, people are not going to look back and say, how could they ever elect a president who, was such an asshole? They're going to say, who got us into this? That's what they're going to say. And Bill Clinton, there were 7 Jane Does that accused Bill Clinton of sexual misconduct. 7.
Yeah.
Do we look back at that and say, well, I mean, we say he was a good president? We're not examining him with a magnifying glass. The Republicans at the time, they did. But that's gone. The half-life on that is short. Nobody's going back and thinking and that's Trump is worse than Clinton was. And as I say, the erratic part is a whole nother thing, because I don't know if I can trust him to listen to his advisors, to deliberate things in a slow way. But Kamala Harris, does she have the experience and the IQ, forgive me, to game out Iran? When she looked at the maps, okay, she looked at the maps, as Douglas Murray said, and nobody in the IDF ever looked at the maps. So this is not an easy question to me, and it bothers me that people think it is, and they'll characterize me as not caring about how awful Trump is. I do, but I just say one other thing. I'm talking a lot from time to time in business. Hatem knows this. I caught somebody stealing, stealing a lot.
I don't know this because it's me. I know this because I'm a friend.
But they're a very, very important, very, very important backbone of the operation employee. And sometimes you keep them. You figure out how to manage it, because the pristine character it will not work. You know, so this is the problem before the American people. I don't hear it often enough expressed. That's the problem. It's not that you think he's okay. So anyway, this is all a roundabout way of saying I haven't been following the legal stuff, mostly because I've lost interest in it, because I'm totally convinced with everything I need to know as a voter about what it is. I also heard some judge say that they think that he's going to get actually sentenced to jail for this thing in New York. I think that would be just despicable.
I don't agree.
You don't agree?
I don't agree that he's going to get, and I'll give you a couple. I have an itemized list here. First,
good.
Donald Trump was convicted of the lowest level felony in New York. Now, people on the other side will say, yeah, but he was convicted of 30 of them. Now, in my view, you know, we call this grouping. I think you can count all of these as part of the same essential transaction. This wasn't 30 separate. They were technically 30 separate transactions, but there is a lot of debate for sentencing purposes when you have multiple crimes of conviction. Are they all part of the same thing? Are you piling on, or are they all separate instances? You can imagine if somebody goes out on a spree and assaults several different people in an evening or over a couple weeks, you can treat those separately. I mean, they're discrete events. You have different victims, but these are all some part of the same series of payments to Stormy Daniels that he was convicted of. So in my view, they should be grouped together. Beyond that, you have a first-time offender, major factor in sentencing, nonviolent, no guns, no drugs, no children involved, no violence, all the factors that would ordinarily be an aggravating factor that would lean towards a sentence of incarceration. And you have somebody who is over 70. That is a factor to be considered. And then you simply have, which I think you must consider, the administrative nightmare of sentencing to prison, which we know is going to be for a short term. What is the point of sentencing someone to a short term in prison that will be an administrative nightmare beyond? I mean, they had to shut down so much of that courthouse just for trial itself. Imagine trying to send him to somewhere like Rikers or any state prison facility. It's just not realistic. But let's say, take that away for a moment. Say, hey, that's not fair. You shouldn't be treated any differently. I have some thoughts on that. I mean, we often treat different defendants differently. So that's, I don't really buy that. This whole everyone's the same in the eyes of the law, that's just not true. I mean, sentencing law will demonstrate that we treat people very differently according to their individual characteristics, especially if they're better people than career offenders. We treat those people differently. And Donald Trump is a first-time offender. Now, the problem for him is later on, if he's convicted in other crimes, he's someone with a criminal history. So for the moment, the New York case should not result in a sentence of incarceration. And the only factor I see aggravating towards a sentence of incarceration is simply how annoying Donald Trump was to Justice Merchan throughout the trial, how he had to be gagged and how he was recalcitrant and how he was a pain in the butt to the court. Those might lean towards a sentence of incarceration, but they really shouldn't when you weigh it against all the other evidence. And what I try to do is think about this. If I had a 70-year-old who was convicted of some false entry in a business record, I don't care if it was 1 count or 30 counts, if it was all kind of part of the same group of transactions, then I would have zero problem expecting that a judge would sentence to either house arrest or straight probation.
Yeah, I agree with you. The guy who told me this was a judge, and he went to Yale Law School, so I kind of cowered, like, you know, he's got the resume to know what he's talking about, but it didn't make any sense to me. It just seems outrageous. What seems to me much more likely is that this gets overturned on appeal. It's just an awful conviction.
Yeah,
but
I felt that way about New York. Now, isn't it strange how life goes, Noam? If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have ranked in order of threats to Donald Trump, the New York, out of 4 criminal cases. You had 2 state court cases, 1 in Georgia, 1 in New York. And then you had 2 federal cases, 1 in Florida, 1 in DC. I would have ranked the federal cases first and second because, quite simply, when you're a federal criminal defendant, you're going to lose. The statistics are in. I've handled many federal cases. They're depressing. They are really difficult to have a conversation with your client about because it's all bad news. You can win on a few counts, but for the most part, everybody who goes to trial gets convicted. And I say everybody, the statistics are around 95%. And by the way, the number of people who go to trial in federal court are tiny, less than 10%. 90+% plead guilty. Of those that go to trial, 90+% are convicted. So imagine that, having an initial conversation with a client charged with a federal crime where you have to explain to them, look, the reality is this is the longest of long shots, but I'll do my best and we're going to fight, but this is a long shot. And there are a lot of incentives to pleading guilty in federal court. So I would have ranked the federal cases the two biggest threats, because also in federal court, they move relatively quickly. So I would have expected them to go to trial sooner than the state court cases. And then third, I would have put the Georgia case. And then fourth, a distant fourth, I put New York. And yet that one went to trial first. It may be the only one that goes to trial. If he's elected, the federal cases will go away. And I honestly think Atlanta, the Georgia case, has been completely botched by the prosecutors down there, who couldn't even manage to keep their personal lives out of it. I think they've done a really terrible job, and the courts move so slowly down there that this case will be dragging along probably for years. You know, in 2023, I was saying these cases are going to trial in 2025. I said it on air, and everybody laughed at me. And here we are. They may not even go to trial, but if they do, it's 2025.
Oh, good for you. I mean, by the way, I found that a couple months ago, I took the time to listen to that entire phone call. I think maybe we spoke about it. Maybe it was even for the podcast with you. And I became convinced that at least if the court system is operating properly, they would not convict him on that Georgia call. When you take the one sentence out and find me the whatever number of votes it was, it sounds bad. But when you listen to the whole context of the call, you can't convict. You can't convict somebody.
It's one of those things where I feel like it's felt very Emperor's New Clothes to me. I'm in the minority. I'm probably the only person, that goes on air and talks about this. But to me, it felt like a snippet of somebody ranting, and it's never felt like a real demand. If you listen or read the transcript, he says something shortly after, maybe a few sentences later, that I think is worse. I mean, he suggests to Raffensperger and his lawyer that they may be committing federal crimes. Now, if you, me, or Hatem suggested that, who cares? We're private citizens. But this is the head of the executive branch and the DOJ saying you may be committing federal crimes. That to me was more problematic, but I've never believed the find me 11,000 votes was anything more than just the sort of the outrageous demands, or really an expression of hope by Trump.
So just as I recall, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the first part of the call, Trump goes through this whole litany of it was all bullshit. I don't know if he knew it was bullshit at the time, but the whole litany of reports. They found ballots under the table here. This guy was in the bathroom. This was unlocked. This was and he went of all these openings for mischief. And he says, with all this, find me 11,000 votes. They got to be there. This is a ridiculous system. That's not a crime. That's just, you put somebody in jail for that.
Well, I try to take a step back and say, when I try to explain the cases to people, if it's not easy to explain, then that should be a kind of a red flag. I think the sensitive national the national security documents case, I think that's relatively easy to explain to people. He took these documents, they're sensitive. He played games when it came to giving them back, and he may have deceived people about their location and whether he had them. That one, you can sell. January 6th, I think there are parts of it that it's kind of a wide-ranging case. There are parts of it that I think are easily explained. I think there are other parts that are tougher. But of course, to me, the New York case, the payoff to Stormy Daniels, I mean, to this day, I think it's difficult to explain to people how exactly he was convicted and what the crime was of conviction. I think that's tough, but that's generally been my sort of litmus test. Can you explain it to someone who hasn't been paying attention in a sentence or two? And it can be tough for these Trump cases.
Yeah, I agree with you. And go ahead, Hatem. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so if you have the top lawyers trying to do this, they must know that they have no case. So why they continue doing it if it's other reasons than personal gain, or they ran election on it, or political?
Who are the lawyers? You mean the government or defense lawyers?
The federal, the government. Yeah.
Well, I've always felt, and this is just me, I've always felt that there's something, I think the special counsel, the concept of the special counsel is a good thing. But it calls to mind for me the idea of if you appoint a hammer, it's going to go looking for a nail. A special counsel is appointed with these vast powers, and they're given a singular job: investigate this guy. I think federal prosecutors are machines. They're actually very they're not just machines. They are well-tuned machines. They are Ferraris of prosecution. And if you say, go look into everything this guy has done, you may find stuff that you didn't even know you would find, and the guy ends up getting prosecuted. So, I mean, that's kind of, that's not necessarily a defensible position because,
But you would know that it's not going anywhere. Why go up with it? Why continue investigating and take it to court knowing that it's not going to go anywhere?
Well, they don't know that. I mean, that's what special counsels are appointed for. Hey, something seems strange. There may be a conflict of interest with the DOJ. Therefore, we're going to appoint Robert Mueller. We're going to appoint Jack Smith to investigate this and reduce the conflict. But I mean, they're given these vast powers. They investigate. They want to do a good job. They want to do a complete job. But here's the thing. Once you start seizing people's phones and laptops, they've been up to anything fishy, you're going to find it. I mean, there's just no question. And so, I have many thoughts about the Donald Trump prosecutions. There are days when I think, they're righteous, and there are other days when I think, well, I'm not entirely sure. This filing, I'll give you an example. This filing that came out yesterday, I heard a lot of folks go on air and say how devastating it was and how it's just, it's the nail in the coffin. But when you read it, pretty much everything that happened on January 6th has been poured over by committees, by reporters. There wasn't a whole lot in there that I hadn't heard about before, maybe a couple nuggets here and there. So, I mean, at this point, going to your earlier point, Noam, is this a document that really affects voters? Now, we're kind of outside my area of expertise, but as I was reading it, I found myself thinking, I don't know that there's anything here that anybody didn't know or didn't expect. So, for example, if you read that when Donald Trump was told that Mike Pence was under attack in the House, or excuse me, in the Senate, and Trump's response was, "So what?" That sounds terrible, but it's also, am I surprised? I mean, I would have expected he said something that callous, and maybe we already knew that. Now that I think of it, but we've had 4 years of evidence coming out about January 6th. Yeah. I didn't find myself blown away by 165 pages. What I was impressed by was Jack Smith's argument that what Trump did was as a candidate and not as an official. And I thought that was a strong argument. I really did. The facts that came out, I was not blown away by.
So he said Mike Pence they're gonna kill him. He said he doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, when he was told that Mike Pence had been moved to a secure location because the Capitol was under attack, he apparently responded, "Yeah, so what?" Which is awful. I mean, that's not the right answer.
Well, many times there was fights at the Comedy Cellar. I'm outside by myself, and Noam will say, "Close the doors." I was like, "But Hatem is outside."
Yeah, business is business. No, look, if you go back and read, I had this podcast with Destiny and our other podcast, and he knows everything, right? So I had to review some stuff, and he's a very interesting guy. Anyway,
yes, he is.
So I went back and I I read for the first time the January 6th committee's summary of the evidence. Now I had my problems with that because they really didn't let any Republicans, oppositional Republicans on the committee. So I don't completely trust it, but there was enough just direct transcripts there, and it paints a picture literally of the shit's hitting the fan, and everybody from Sean Hannity, from his daughter, from his chief of staff, everybody saying, "Mr. President, you have to do something. Somebody's going to get hurt," and he's just sitting on his hands doing nothing. I mean, it's just, and even
terrible.
And as much as I didn't think Trump was a choir boy, I have to admit this is beyond even what I would have expected. It just paints a terrible, and even if it's exaggerated by 50%, it's still a terrible picture. So and anybody can read that. But then at the same time, I also went back and I watched his January 6th speech.
Right.
And I found that to be not insightful at all. Right before that, Giuliani had said we're going to have trial by combat, but he was talking about legal combat.
Right, of course.
I mean, no question he's talking about legal combat. And then Trump says we have to fight, and it was all 100% about procedural fighting. And then the point I made to Destiny, which came to me at the moment, and I don't know if anybody's made it, because I asked him, I said, at one point in the speech, Trump says, we're going to go down there and we're going to protest. I'm going to go down there with you. Remember, Trump says that I'm going to go down there with you. And I asked Destiny, did Trump mean that? Did Trump really mean he was going to go down there with him? And Destiny's like, yeah, the Secret Service told him he couldn't, and he was pissed. He couldn't go. So I said, so you're telling me that Trump meant to incite a violent takeover of the Capitol building, and he meant also to be there with them as it was happening? That just makes no sense.
Right.
He wouldn't want to be anywhere near it if that's what. So that was mutually exclusive thoughts. You can't think he wanted to be there, and he also meant to have this. So he had to choose one, but he didn't. And I felt like he got the upper hand of me a few times in that debate, but not on that point, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, here's, I think Noam, I see where you're coming from, and I find myself often thinking, well, look, I don't think that Trump necessarily wanted a true insurrection, which is a replacement of government. And I think folks get into sort of danger zones. My friend Dino Bedalla is fond of this kind of extreme rhetoric.
And we know,
but I don't think you need it. I don't think you need it because it's just as bad. It's just as bad to me that he didn't care that it was happening, or that he was even gleeful that it was happening. I mean, what a terrible demonstration of character to not care that people are vandalizing, even if you want to minimize it as vandalizing. That's terrible. I don't think you need to go into the whole he wanted to lead an insurrection. I mean, I think it's bad enough that he just didn't care and thought it was funny. I mean, that's terrible.
Well, I'll make another point, which I think is also very difficult to gainsay, is that we know now that Eastman, I think that was his name, had laid out a whole strategy of quasi-legal mumbo jumbo of very unique readings of old laws. And anyway, they had this strategy. Now they knew, obviously, that this was going to be challenged in the legal system at some point. So the question is, in my mind, if you know it's going to be challenged in the legal system, you can't have the outcome have happened because of a violent threat. In other words, if the Senate deliberated and decided not to certify the votes in a arm's length way, then maybe, I think it's ridiculous even then, but you go before the court and say, listen, the Senate chose the blah, 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 and it has to stand. But if you have to go and say, listen, the Senate did this, why'd they do that? They did it because people were screaming, kill Mike Pence, so he had no choice. No court can possibly say it's okay. So the violence was the enemy of their carefully thought out legal plan. And I don't see any way around that argument either.
Can I add a
now? But he's pro-Trump. He's pro-Trump. You know how people get. I'm not pro-Trump.
Right.
But on the other side, imagine this scenario. What if Mike Pence say, okay, I'm not certifying the election. I know we have a system. I know there's a Supreme Court, but I'm talking about the violent. I'm talking about all this. It would have been much, much worse. So maybe
Pence is a hero.
Sure, I agree.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of people say, oh, Trump would never have done. Yeah, because he didn't have a path to it. But we don't know. He literally asked Mike Pence not to certify. So if Pence have not certified the election and say, you know what, you got something there, you're going to have a long time until the Supreme Court say what's going on. And this is
not a long time. They'll do it immediately. But listen, nobody doubts that Trump had a scheme to cheat the American people out of their duly elected president. There's no question about that. The only question is whether or not the violence was part of that plan. And I just don't think it was.
I think he was delighted by it, but I don't know that I've seen the evidence that it was part of his plan. And I think that's where it's tricky because, I think if Trump at face value is bad enough, I don't think you need to embellish anything about Trump. I think he's, his character is clear. He's not someone who would ever care about any of these Americans. It's hilarious to think that people buy that he cares about them. I think it's acceptable to say, hey, just like you did, Noam, the guy's a boob, but from a policy standpoint, there are policies that you can agree with.
Yeah. So let's move to and also with the election, it's not only one person, it's the other candidate also that can, make you make that decision. Let's move to PDiddy, because it's one of the trials that I love. PDiddy.
Danny won't talk about
I think Danny's on the
hold on one second here.
Are you on the list of PDiddy or something? So these are one of the trials that everybody have theories. You see a lot of TikToks about this. Can you give us through the facts of PDiddy, of what actually happened?
So, okay. So P. Diddy is in huge trouble. He's been indicted in federal court for RICO charges, which is basically it's called racketeering, and it was a crime. We can talk a little about. I'll talk a little about each because they're all very diverse. He's charged with RICO, which is racketeering. He's also charged with a statute that I'm dealing with in one of my cases called the TVPA. It's the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Then he's charged with a very interesting crime called the Mann Act. And this is a law that's been around since the 1910s. And it originally criminalized, believe it or not, taking a woman across state lines for immoral purposes. I wrote an entire column about the history of the Mann Act, in that its origins are not only a little misogynistic, they're quite racist, because back in the 1910s, there was this fear of something called white slavery. And it was the idea that these white women were going to big cities and being nabbed up by usually African-American men or other foreigners and sold and brought into slavery. And the statute is actually known as the Mann Act and the White Slave Traffic Act as well. Obviously, nobody calls it that today. But it's a great example of how a law that started out really with not the greatest motivations, at least some thoughts that we would consider pretty retrograde, is now used in a different manner by federal authorities. And in its modern incarnation is used when you transport people across state lines for prostitution. That's exactly what they've charged Diddy with. The other one is the TVPRA, which is the Trafficking Victims Act. It is, it basically combats human trafficking. And then racketeering is a federal statute, and then there are also state versions as well, that essentially, you may have heard of it in context of the mob, but it's a complex statute. But really what it does is it criminalizes corrupting a business, not necessarily a business, but any venture. So an example I love to give is from the movie Goodfellas. You remember when in that film, there's a restaurant owner who wants the mob to help out with his restaurant, and they immediately take it over and they turn it into Crime Central. They use it to steal things. They use it for all kinds of different crimes. And that's a good example of RICO, is when you take, it can be a company, it can be an association, it can be any kind of entity, and corrupt it and turn it into a laboratory for crime. And they're alleging that P. Diddy's empire was used for crime. And that's the allegation in the case, that they used it, that they perverted his company and used it for his sex trafficking and prostitution and other things. The bottom line is Diddy's in huge trouble. And that's evidenced by the fact that he's detained pending trial. That's because of the severity of the charges and the evidence they have. The government had to put on some degree of evidence to establish that Diddy is guilty for him to be held without bail, because the Bail Reform Act, the federal law that governs bail, expresses a preference for defendants getting out or being out prior to trial. These crimes are so serious, they're among a list of crimes that create a reverse situation where the defendant has to prove that he isn't a threat to the public and is likely to be there at trial. And even though the offer of many millions of dollars for bond did not sway the judge, and he may have breathed his last free air for decades or maybe the rest of his life.
That's what I want to ask.
He's also a flight risk, right? That's part of it also.
That's part of it. Yes. It's flight risk and danger to the community.
But if you commit, if you accuse of murder, you can put a bond of like $1 million come out, and he offered 50 million and still didn't come out, or give him.
Yeah.
They're not taking any chances with him.
Yeah. Right.
That's crazy. Maybe can he make a deal? Can he tell us who killed Tupac and come out?
Well, it's funny you say that. So, deal making in the federal courts with federal prosecutors is not, they're not in the business of wheeling and dealing. And if they feel like they have a strong enough case, they may not offer anything, because if you think about it this way, Diddy is probably at the top of the pyramid of whatever, there probably are no other bad guys above Diddy that they wanted. If Diddy was a low-level guy, then those are the kinds of people that the government would deal with. But you notice he's the only one charged. It's really interesting. The government with cases like RICO or conspiracy, they'll often charge multiple people, but they've only charged Diddy, and that's sending a clear message. He's all they want. maybe they'll amend, or excuse me, maybe they'll supersede the indictment and add more defendants. But it seems like that's who they want, and they probably don't feel like the need to offer him a deal. And by the way, if you're Diddy, you're not going to get a great deal. I mean, maybe they would let him plead to the indictment and make no sentencing recommendation, which is barely a deal because you're still under the guidelines, probably looking at, I mean, at least 20 years. I haven't run his guidelines, but I mean, there's no deal or even plea that would be appetizing to Diddy. So for that reason, even though 90% of federal cases are pleas, Diddy's probably going to trial.
You know, my mind is wandering to the Jeffrey Epstein thing. When I always suspected that there weren't going to be a lot of people that were going to be implicated by Epstein because I felt that his compulsion to be with underage women was so off-putting that he had to keep that part of it mostly a secret, meaning that there's plenty of women out there who are 18 but look 15 or 16, and Epstein was like, no, I don't want an 18-year-old.
Right.
Listen to me, Ghislaine. I need a real 15-year-old. Right.
Unbelievable.
So,
yeah.
So I don't doubt that he had wild parties with women and maybe prostitutes, whatever it is. But the underage aspect, I don't picture Bill Clinton going over and saying, yeah, get me a 50-year-old, because I don't think Bill Clinton wants that and be stupid enough to do that in front of another person. There's so many reasons that I didn't think there's gonna be a lot of people who'll be involved in that. But this Diddy thing, there's going to be a lot of people, I think, who are involved in a lot of really bad, over-the-top shit.
And yes, and Noam, to borrow a rule of improv, yes, and I think in the Diddy case, you're going to have a lot of really outrageous evidence in a way that you didn't in Epstein and Weinstein, because my sense is, look, Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, said part of the evidence at his press conference was these freakouts, I think, or freak-offs, or whatever they called those parties that they would have. I mean, that suggests to me that it was brazen. And when it's brazen, you probably have video, you probably have cell phone video, probably have people exchanging pictures. I think you're going to see a lot of really, really bad evidence come out in the Diddy case. And I think the only thing that might lead to him going to trial is just his own refusal to believe that he's in huge trouble, which is, by the way, the reason a lot of clients end up going to trial, is that they're just not realistic about their chances.
It's nothing, just as an aside, it's interesting to me. Like, you think, well, what do you expect? He's famous, he's in the music business, and then you look at a guy like Paul McCartney, who was the biggest star ever, right? And maybe in the world. And his whole biography was like looking for a nice woman to settle down, never spend the night away from Linda. Then he married a woman with one leg, so it's not necessarily true that just because you have that kind of access to, that part of the world, that you have to behave that way. They don't, it's just.
Why? I have two quick questions about Diddy as well. Like, why did they send him to one of, I heard, the worst jails in New York City, that sometimes like judges will give less time just because you go into that jail without being, because he might get killed or something like that. And why now? Were they building this case for a while, or like,
okay,
what is the...
So he's at the detention center in Brooklyn, which is, by the way, the standard place in federal cases. They can't send him to a state facility. And in my view, this is just my personal opinion, federal detention centers are usually better than state facilities. That's just my experience. Maybe it's different out in Wyoming if you go to a state facility or a county facility. But in my experience, federal detention centers are better. They're all bad. I mean, they're all miserable places to be. And I visit them, and I'm only there for a couple hours at a time, and I want to pull my hair out. So
this one, I don't know if you heard our friends Eli Hanning on Stephen A. Smith's show. He was talking specifically about how bad that jail is. And he said that the judge will reduce few years of the sentence just for being in that jail. That's how awful it is.
Sure. I mean, look, they're all bad. And so the second question was, Diddy may be, this may be the biggest self-inflicted wound in the history of the law, because, and I don't know I don't know why, I'm not criticizing his lawyers. I don't know why this happened, but you'll recall last year, his ex-girlfriend I believe her name's Cassandra, filed a massive lawsuit against him. And almost within 24 hours, the lawsuit was settled. But once it was out, I think that's what caught the eye of federal authorities. I have to believe that if Cassandra's legal team reached out to Diddy in advance before filing, and if he had a chance to settle it, which he did anyway a day after it was filed, if he had an opportunity to settle it, which would have been standard, I do plaintiff's work. If you have a big case like that, and it's something, I've had cases that would involve large corporations that would be sensitive to the bad press, and you give them a chance, you say, this is what we're going to file. It's not blackmail. You're saying, look, just so you know, we're always interested in discussions, but we believe we have a case. This is what we plan to file. And we're sending you a copy in advance so you can give it to your as a courtesy to your insurance carrier. I think Diddy should have settled that if he had gotten a copy of it the day before it was filed, because I think that's what got the federal government interested in Diddy. And that's what put him on the map. The federal government prosecutors don't have to follow civil complaints because they know, as I do, that not everything in a civil complaint is subject to the highest level of scrutiny when it comes to facts. It isn't. I mean, right? If you have any personal experience with civil litigation, you know this. You allege things in a complaint that
I always bullshit when I accuse people of stuff.
It was so awful, the allegations in that complaint, that the federal government decided, well, let's look into this. I don't think there was an investigation that existed before that. I could be wrong. So they investigated, and sure enough, I mean, this is probably what brought Diddy down, or a huge component of what brought him down. And it's an unforced error because he could have settled it before they filed, I think. I mean, I assume that he had a chance to settle it and waited until a day after it was filed. But by then, the cat's out of the bag. There's nothing you can do.
There's a lot of cats in this episode.
Which case was it? Wasn't it Diddy where they unearthed some really old video outside an elevator in a hotel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, what were the odds of that? I can't get my organization to produce a video for me of something that happened a week ago.
Right. No, I know. And that's, it's really interesting how that stuff emerges. Would it have emerged if there hadn't been that complaint filed? Because what you find, whether it's Weinstein or Epstein, is that once, someone lands that first blow in the public, people are less afraid to come forward. So this might have been a piece of video that somebody was terrified of ever getting out. Then he sees all this stuff happening to Diddy, and they think, oh, well, what the heck? He's going down. He's not a threat to me anymore. That could have been what happened. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, when these things happen, they come not in single spies, but in whole battalions, right?
Now, is there something about, I mean, Donald Trump actually had said, when he said, when you're famous, they let you do anything, grab them by the pussy, right? He was kind of alluding to a same kind of wild lifestyle.
Sure. And by the way, he's probably right. I'm sure when you're that level of famous that things get a little weird, I guess.
But my question is, are people of a certain bad character attracted to this lifestyle? Do they go into or does the lifestyle corrupt them? Like
Noam, I would think of you and Hatem as the experts on this because you're around, massively famous people all the time. So I don't know. It's a question for the ages. I don't know if there's any way, do you get into it because you have that kind of defect that you want that kind of life, no matter how hard you have to work for it? Or does it corrupt you? Does it corrupt someone who is otherwise well-behaved once they become massively famous? And Diddy's on that level. I mean, he's on Trump level. He was that famous.
Yeah. And that's why when I ask about the jail, it's like, if you're expecting him to give names and stuff like that, why would you put him in a place where his life could be in danger?
Oh, well, because the other thing is that, it's a tremendous strategic advantage for the government to have someone held pending trial because it's a war of attrition. And it's really difficult to prep for trial when your client's incarcerated. You can't pick up the phone. You can't call him. You can't meet with him. You can't get documents. He can't give you documents. It's really, really, really difficult. So that's a tremendous strategic advantage to the government. And if it's a war of attrition, maybe it'll make them more likely to plead. Although I don't think the government really cares one way or another if Diddy pleads. I think they're ready to go to trial.
All right, Eric Adams, couple more minutes.
Yeah, I've only got about a couple minutes, folks. Yeah. So let's do some Eric Adams.
You know what's funny? I have a friend of mine. he met Eric Adams the first time. They exchanged numbers. As Eric Adams leave, the FBI stopped him and took the phone.
Oh my gosh.
I swear to God.
That's great. That's great.
Sounds like one of Danny's clients.
He's terrified.
You told us a story about some mishap with some client, like with some freak of luck. Anyway, go ahead. Hop him quick because Danny has to go.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Eric Adams, so Eric Adams is a really fascinating case. What I found is that, people who have read the indictment and read about the charges come down, one of two ways. And it's often that way with corruption. It was that way. It's with corruption, it comes down to this. Was there some official benefit given to a private citizen in exchange for goodies, money, any benefits? Doesn't have to be a bag of cash. It can be virtually anything. So it's broadly defined, but the key is the quid pro quo. Was the this given for the that? And what the government does is they will throw up all this evidence of benefits on both sides. And the challenge is always showing that they're connected, because the defense is always going to be, oh, I made this phone call to the fire department because I believed it was the right thing to do as the mayor. Oh, and they just happened to hand me, gold bars, but I'm mixing my criminal cases with the Menendez case. But you get the idea. And it's rarely as obvious as a bag of cash. It's usually some other kind of benefit of some kind. So in this case, it might be campaign contribution. So Eric Adams, it's a very serious case, but I also understand the defense point of view, which is going to be essentially that none of these things are connected. The problem is the whole Turkish element and the really what I think are very clumsy accepting of what are obviously benefits from the Turkish government and Turkish Airlines. I think those are going to be really problematic from the perspective that the jury is going to find them offensive.
Did I see a headline that the deputy mayor or whatever his title is also implicated?
I mean, so many people in Adam's circle are implicated. I mean, he's got lots of problems. And folks, I got to head down. Thank you. I love you guys. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry I have to tonight. Run. Can you stop by the Olive Tree if you're free?
For real?
Yeah, for real. If you're free, yeah.
Okay.
You're free. No
All
pressure.
Right. I've got an 8:00 hit, but it's if I can, great.
I'm meeting.
No worries, you can. We schedule that thing at his leisure. Anyway, go ahead.
Whenever.
Anyway, go. The America's waiting. Go, Danny.
Love you guys.
Bye.
Thank you, Danny. You want to hear my Eric Adams joke?
Yeah.
Okay, I can prove that he's not in connection with the Turkish because he's still bald. You know how Turkish will know.
Yeah, that's not bad.
You like it?
All right.
You want to take a minute?
Until I like it, but many people won't know about the Turkish hair transplants. I know because I had a friend who went to Turkey to get hair transplants.
Oh yeah, it's very well known in the Middle East about the Turkish hair transplant hair. You want to take a minute and then we'll come back and.
Yeah, I sent you an email by the way from somebody who wants us to go to Dubai.
Oh, okay.
Look at the email.
I'll check it out.
I tagged you on Twitter.
Okay.